After spying on Trump, Congress should use FISA Section 702 reauthorization to end domestic political surveillance under Title I once and for all. It's time to reform FISA or else to end it. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today, we're going to be talking about FISA 702 reauthorization. It's coming due at the end of this year, December 31, 2023. This has come up in the 2022 midterms where Jim Jordan, now the Judiciary Committee chairman, was saying that they should just end FISA altogether because it's being used for domestic political surveillance. In fact, why FISA was originally drafted by Senator Frank Church back in the 70s. To reform the nation's intelligence agencies that were being used to spy on the American people during the Vietnam War and the LBJ and kind of Nixon eras. But also long before then, just a long history of abuse by the FBI in terms of domestic surveillance that I believe FISA was designed to address. They created the FISA court that would basically try to get warrants. If they were going to do domestic surveillance, then it needed to be under Article 3, the judicial branch. But it seems like it's become more of a rubber stamp, the FISA court. And so we at Americans for Limited Government have been highlighting these abuses, particularly after Edward Snowden, via the former National Security Agency contractor, kind of blew the lid off of mass surveillance in the modern technological era with his story that he provided to The Guardian and the Washington Post about a decade ago. So this is, I think, a long time coming in terms of these abuses kind of coming to the fore. And I think Snowden gave us a piece of it and showed us the first time we'd ever seen a FISA warrant to do with like 200 million phone records. But it wasn't until FISA warrants were used against the Trump campaign in 2016, and then it was subsequently declassified under the Trump administration after he got into office, that I think we've gotten the fullest possible glimpse of what's really going on in terms of these FISA warrants and how they are used to interfere in U.S. political elections and presidential politics. In 2016, October, the Trump campaign advisor, Carter Page, had a warrant taken out on him via the FISA court. And this carried over into the Trump transition. They knew he had won the election, but they kept the surveillance going. He was being sworn into office in January of 2017, and they kept the surveillance going. They kept the investigation ongoing. And this is really wrong. This is unconstitutional, but it's also probably not really following FISA and the protections that were put into place. They should have known that this was all BS concocted by the Clinton campaign, that she had contracted a former British spy, Christopher Steele, to write this dossier that was the basis for the FISA warrant against Carter Page, which would have gone to his contacts as well. It goes to Carter Page, but then it goes to his contacts and then contacts of contacts. And so basically connect the entire Trump campaign and people that were in contact with Carter Page as well, of course. And I share my screen now, and we'll go through my piece on this because there's quite a lot to do with the this issue. After spying on Trump, Congress should use FISA. Jim Jordan, in October of 2022, he was on with Maria Bartiromo on Fox Business, and she was talking with him about FISA and what to do about the runaway DOJ and FBI abuses. He said, quote, "We need to make changes to the FISA process. I think we should not even reauthorize FISA, which is going to come up in the next Congress." So it's coming up at the end of this year. He was outlining his opposition to reauthorization of Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which expires December 31. Executive branch officials say it is critical to protecting national security if it expires, and so that's something to consider. Like, how do they use this to kind of protect the United States from foreign terrorist attacks in the wake of 9/11? It's the only section, however, of FISA that sunsets on a periodic basis and thus provides an opportunity however, periodically for members of Congress to address the decades-long problem of domestic political surveillance. That should be true whether surveillance abuses are occurring under Section 702 or more usually, as in the case of the 2016 spying on the Trump campaign by the FBI and intelligence agencies under Title I of the law, which is not up for reauthorization. Again, whenever the question, though, comes up about Section 702 since 2008, attempts at intelligence reform are always deflected and rebuffed. That's the wrong section. No, you're talking about Title I. Wait till Title I comes up. Guess what? Title I never comes up. It's a permanent feature of law. Civil liberties groups are often frustrated by that, so they will target Section 702 and say, hey, why don't you hold up the reauthorization so that we can get broader intel reforms, more protections for civil liberties, or else we shouldn't be doing this on U.S. soil. It violates the Fourth Amendment prohibition on unreasonable searches and seizures. This doesn't amount to probable cause whatsoever. Now, Jordan, for his part, he thinks the abuses of the FBI and of the surveillance are directly related to one another. In the interview, he added with Bartiromo that in 2016, quote, they spied on Trump's campaign. In 2018, it was the Mueller investigation. In 2020, they suppressed information about the Hunter Biden laptop. And now in 2022, they have raided the home of the former president, taken the phone of a sitting member of Congress 91 days before an election. Now, we actually spoke with Devin Nunes about this. The date on that. It was in November of 2022. Devin Nunes, the House GOP needs something like a church commission, quote, that's going to dissect the entire DOJ, the entire intelligence apparatus. If you click the link in the description and you go to my piece, you'll find a link to this Devin Nunes. I also dropped it in the chat there so you could see the transcript. Devin Nunes was very forthcoming. Got pretty fired up in this interview, which is about 30, 40, maybe an hour, 30, 40 minutes or an hour long. But I quote the relevant portion here. So he talks about using Section 702 as leverage in Congress to get reforms. He says, quote, so the problem is you can only take hostage of that one piece, speaking to Section 702. That's the only piece that really goes away. The rest of it stays there. So the question is, how do you, and the FISA court is clearly guilty, the FBI and all these jokers, whether or not it's ever going to be proven, they knew from the very beginning that this was fraudulent, and they went purposely to the FISA court. Remember, they relied on the judges. They knew what judge would do this. There's enough circumstantial evidence. And of course, with all of the avalanche of all the other evidence that we know, you'd have to be a fool to believe that this was not concocted from the very beginning. So he added, so the Congress would have to reauthorize 702. It's only one small piece of FISA. So they got a hell of a mess on their hands, because by just letting it expire, it doesn't fix the overall problem. Title I will still be there, as I mentioned. It doesn't stop what these corrupt people were able to do. It also doesn't fix this new scheme of just happening to run FBI informants all over anyone who is involved with the Republican Party. So there is a clear, you want to use 702, you want to use the reauthorization. Here's an obstacle. Even if you allow the reauthorization to expire, the rest of FISA will still be there. Its surveillance state will still be there. So that's something to consider, that just letting it expire won't fix this problem. So if you're going to use it, you have to get reforms into the reauthorization, and then you might be able to find the votes for it. He also added, I think it's going to be, they really need something like a church commission that's going to dissect the entire DOJ, the entire intelligence apparatus. And yet, once all the information from Chairman Jordan's committee, his new church commission, has been gathered. Besides must-pass pieces of legislation, whether it be Section 702 reauthorization, the annual national defense authorizations, the 31.4 trillion national debt ceiling the House just passed, with lots of provisions besides just increasing the debt ceiling attached, or the annual omnibus spending bills and appropriations bills, what other leverage do members of Congress have to enact reforms? Elections matter, we are taught, and yet since the advent of the modern filibuster and Rule 22 of the standing rules of the Senate requiring supermajorities, most recently with 60 votes in the Senate, used to be more than that, Republicans have never, ever had a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate with which to enact reforms. And lacking a bipartisan consensus to act under normal order, reformers are left with simply these must-pass bills that permanent state needs to continue operating, whether by legal authorizations or spending authorizations. The only constitutional tether representatives and senators have to potentially rein in executive branch abuses directly under the Article 1, Section 8 powers of Congress, and Article 1 more broadly. And no less than the two-party system is at stake, I argue. That is, the very mixed government that the American people just voted for in the 2022 midterms depends critically on this oversight to begin, as it is today, in a House Judiciary Committee, one of the subcommittees hearing, entitled Fixing FISA, How a Law Designed to Protect Americans Has Been Weaponized. And you can actually check out Andy Biggs. He's got an opening statement here, but then there's about 4 hours of testimony that we're not going to go through right now. But we are going to talk about these past abuses and how it should be the focus of these committees, and potentially kind of show what maybe can be done in the reforms. But I did get part of the opening statement here. Big states, quote, the United States intelligence community has shown they cannot be fully trusted to retain this vast power. In fact, I cannot think of an example when a powerful intelligence tool was not abused in the United States in this way. When we give power to the federal government has abused that power seemingly every time. He's not wrong. And the best example of FISA abuse that we know about, thanks to the declassification process lawfully undertaken by former President Donald Trump, is the top secret investigation by the Obama administration, Justice Department, and intelligence agencies of the opposition party, the Trump campaign, and the Republicans in the 2016 election year that falsely accused Trump of being a Russian agent. A good way to do that is to look at all of the laws that authorize the botched investigation, including the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. I suppose we could look over at the Congressional Review Service. They have their own kind of think tank over there. It's called the Congressional Review Service. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, an overview. Congress enacted the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act in 1978. It provides a statutory framework for government agencies to obtain authorization to gather foreign intelligence by means of electronic surveillance, physical searches, pen registers, and trap and trace devices, and the production of certain business records. Agencies typically request authorization for such activities from the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, a specialized court created by FISA to act as a so-called neutral arbiter of agency request for FISA orders. This followed revelations regarding widespread privacy violations by the federal government during the 1960s and 70s. Congress enacted FISA to establish guidelines for government collection of foreign intelligence. FISA defines foreign intelligence information as information relating to a foreign power or that generally concerns the ability of the United States to protect against international terrorism or a potential attack by a foreign power or agent of a foreign power. Though Congress initially limited FISA to regulating government use of electronic surveillance, Congress subsequently amended FISA to regulate other intelligence gathering practices such as physical surface searches and the use of PRTT devices and compelling production of certain business records, particularly after 9/11. Congress enacted the USA Patriot Act to provide enhanced investigative tools to, quote, assist in the prevention of future terrorist attacks and the preliminary acts and crimes with which further such activities. In particular, Section 215 of the Patriot Act enlarged the scope of FISA's business records provisions. Following revelations that the National Security Agency was engaged in the bulk collection of telephone metadata under Section 215 of the Patriot Act, thanks to Edward Snowden, that's why we know that, Congress enacted the USA Freedom Act, supposedly, which narrowed Section 215 and FISA's PRTT authority and provided express authority for the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court to appoint amici curiae to supplement its normally ex parte, means that you can't defend yourself if you're being accused of being a foreign agent. Even if you're a U.S. citizen, you can't challenge it, just as Carter Page was unable to challenge his spying that occurred against him. And I do have the Carter Page FISA warrant here. Let's pull that up because I want you to be able to see what these things look like. Oh, where the heck is it? There's the Steele dossier. There's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. There's Judicial Watch. Here it is. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. This is in October of 2016. They don't tell you. But this is in reading Carter W. Page as a U.S. person. This is a verified application. So this is the warrant application. United States hereby applies to this court for authority to conduct surveillance, I guess, that's described herein pursuant to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978, as amended Title 50 United States Code. I don't know why they're redacting which part of the code. That's public information. You can just look up what the code is. Identity of federal officer making application. This application is made by somebody, a special supervisory special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, whose official duties at FBI headquarters include the supervision of the FBI's investigation of the above captioned target based upon information officially furnished to somebody. And the identity of the target is Carter W. Page, a U.S. citizen and an agent of a foreign power. Turns out this wasn't true. Described in detail below, the status of the target was determined in or about October 2016 from information provided by the U.S. State Department. Keep that in mind. This originated with the U.S. State Department passing information, apparently, to the FBI and the Justice Department stating, we have intelligence. What was this intelligence? Well, it was the Steele dossier. It was what we learned about from the oversight that occurred. Looks like I need to refresh my page here to get the Steele dossier to pop up here. That's all right. We can just always refresh it and copy this over here, bring it over here, paste it over, and then just load it and see if it loads. While that's coming up, though, we can just kind of start going back to the piece here. The broader law allows for surveillance of U.S. citizens, even if they have not committed any crime, on suspicion that they might be foreign agents or perhaps in contact with foreign agents, even if it turns out it was made up. To make the accusation, as happened with the Trump campaign beginning in October 2016, the FBI and the Justice Department had to give the FISA court, quote, a statement of the facts and circumstances relied upon by the applicant to justify his belief that the target of the electronic surveillance is a foreign power or an agent of a foreign power. And then the application of the FISA court to the FISA court stated, quote, this target is Carter Page. We went through this part here. I show in the piece the parts of the application that were one of the quote here. In part, those allegations relied on the Clinton campaign and DNC finance Christopher Steele dossier. Now, did they ever let me pull this thing up? I tell you, man, this thing's not working today. It should just be popping right up. That should be pretty easy to just pop up that link right there. Usually it pops right up. You can just read it. We could just X that out here, go over here, hit that, hit that. Doesn't want to move though. It's not moving. I have too many tabs open. That's probably what the problem is here. That's fine. We could just read from it. He stated that there was, quote, a well-developed conspiracy by Russia and the Trump campaign to hack the DNC and give the emails to WikiLeaks. But they also stated as part of the justification for that interference in the Trump campaign that Russia was attempting to convince the Trump campaign not to send weapons to Ukraine and to instead recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea in Ukraine, telling the FISA court that the Trump campaign, quote, worked behind the scenes to make sure the Republican platform would not call for giving weapons to Ukraine to fight Russian and rebel forces, stating Trump, quote, might recognize Crimea as Russian territory and lift punitive U.S. sanctions against Russia, citing news reports. One of these reports included an August 2016 Politico story. Trump changed views on Ukraine after hiring Manafort. So even in the summer of 2016, Trump is already under suspicion to the field of being a Russian agent, and that this is going to impact probably U.S. efforts to push back Russia in the war in Ukraine after Russia invaded Crimea in Ukraine in 2014. That was following the U.S. deposal of former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. In any event, this story highlighted Trump's positions on Ukraine, including his suggestion the people of Crimea preferred to live in Russia and his doubts that the territories Russia had seized could be reclaimed, and suggested that it might result in World War III, which Trump was running against on the campaign trail as much as he was running against Hillary Clinton. Trump was trying to say, hey, we can only go there are limits to U.S. power. Particularly on, in these former Iron Curtain region countries like Ukraine that are not a part of NATO. And if, you push too far into it, you could find yourselves in a much wider conflict. I think that any sane person can see what's going on in Ukraine right now and say that we are indeed risking a direct war with Russia, which could go nuclear. At a Harrisburg, Pennsylvania rally, Politico quoted Trump saying a military conflict to take back Crimea would risk nuclear war. Quote, you want to go back? You want to have World War III to get it back? Talking about Ukraine. And it quoted Trump on ABC's This Week. This is the FISA warrant application. They're saying these Trump's statements on the campaign trail, running for president, First Amendment protected speech and talking about foreign policy. My goodness, Trump has a different foreign policy than us. We need to spy on him. And ABC's This Week suggesting the people of Crimea supported Russian annexation. Quote, the people of Crimea, from what I've heard, would rather be with Russia than where they were. That's his opinion. This was Trump's anti-war position in 2016 that helped him secure narrow wins in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and an electoral college majority against Hillary Clinton, who we often call the warmonger. She was a warmonger. I think that's accurate. So that was the predicate before the FISA court. A foreign power was allegedly attempting to influence the candidate Trump via campaign volunteers like Page, but also hired help like Manafort to simply recognize Russia's claims to Ukraine's sovereign territories in order to avert war. So if you're trying to avert war, you oppose a war we're not even directly involved with, right? Are you allowed to have that position? Are you allowed to run against the preferences of then the Obama administration? Apparently not. Not without getting spied upon, not without having that investigation get carried over into the Trump administration, effectively creating two executive branches, getting the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, removed basically from power, even as he was still in office, so that they can eventually get a special counsel appointed and run all these people at the Trump White House. Michael Flynn gets deposed very similarly after being interviewed by FBI agents in an ambush interview, basically at the White House. I think they were trying to entrap Trump and his advisors and to try to kneecap the administration on the way in because of these policies. They didn't agree with the policy. They wanted a different policy and probably, of course, a different president too. But the American people voted for that president and they voted for those policies. So what do? Well, before then, during the convention, Paul Manafort was a campaign chairman who was swiftly removed by Trump after the New York Times, not so coincidentally, ran an erroneous hit piece in August of 2016 stating he had corrupt dealings with Ukraine. Let's see here. We can pull that up as well. We have the New York Times here, secret ledger in Ukraine lists cash for Donald Trump's campaign chief. Now, I think this story this is from August 14, 2016. This story in part turns out to be untrue. But there was a so-called ominous sounding black ledger, quote unquote. Manafort was the campaign manager of deposed former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. And he also helped, and that was when he was first elected in 2010, Viktor Yanukovych. He also helped Gerald Ford to secure the Republican nomination on the floor against Ronald Reagan in 1976. And then he helped Reagan do the same thing in 1980. In 2016, Trump tapped him to win the convention as well by ensuring Trump delegates he had won in the primaries would almost certainly vote for him and for him on the floor. So Paul Manafort, he's Republican political function. He's so good at his job, I guess, oversees, presidents or people running for office. They want to hire American political advisors who know what they're doing to help them win elections too. And that's what happened with Yanukovych. Page was similarly removed from the campaign when a September 2016 news story appeared alleging, falsely as it turns out, that he was a Russian agent. Intel's probe tie Trump advisor in Kremlin. This is a cough on September 23, 2016. U.S. intelligence officials are seeking to determine whether an American businessman identified by Donald Trump as one of his foreign policy advisors has opened up private communications with senior Russian officials, including talks about the possible lifting sanctions if the Republican nominee becomes president, according to multiple sources who have been briefed on this issue. Notice how these mirror the allegations in the FISA warrant, which comes a few weeks later at the Justice Department to the FISA court. The activities of Trump campaign advisor Carter Page, who has extensive business interests in Russia, has been discussed with senior members of Congress during recent briefings about suspected efforts by Moscow to influence the presidential election, the sources said. After one of those briefings, Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid wrote FBI Director James Comey, citing reports of meetings between a Trump advisor, a reference to Page, and high-ranking sanctioned officials in Moscow over the summer as evidence of significant and disturbing ties between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin that needed to be investigated by the Bureau. Some of those briefed were, quote, taken aback when they learned that Page's contacts were in Moscow, viewing them as a possible back channel to the Russians that could undercut U.S. foreign policy, said a congressional source familiar with the briefings. He was giving a commencement address at one of the Moscow universities. And as far as his business interests, I believe those were to do with the energy industry. Russia is one of the top oil producers and natural gas producers in the world. And at this point, the U.S. was still doing trade with Russia. So it's not unusual for people with Russian, area expertise, whether it be via the energy industry, to then be an advisor on a campaign or even a member of an administration. Because of their expertise. I don't know how expert he was, but, he wasn't a foreign agent. I'll tell you that much, because that's what the Mueller report eventually finds. Ultimately, former special counsel Robert Mueller found there was no campaign conspiracy with Russia. If you go to the Mueller report, this is the report on the investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Special counsel Robert Mueller III was in March of 2019. We're going to quote portions of this. He states, according to the final report to the Attorney General, quote, the evidence was not sufficient to charge that any member of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with representatives of the Russian government to interfere in the 2016 election. The report added, quote, in particular, the office did not find evidence likely to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that campaign officials such as Paul Manafort, George Papadopoulos, and Carter Page acted as agents of the Russian government or at its direction, control, or request during the relevant time period. In other words, the basis for the FISA warrant was bogus. This is what the FISA warrant was designed to investigate. The key allegations that were included in the FISA warrant was that Carter Page was a foreign agent and that the Trump campaign was moving its campaign positions in favor of Russia. But here he finds did not find evidence likely to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. So if you want to give the benefit of the doubt that there was some circumstantial evidence there, fine. But it was nothing you could prove in court, and certainly nothing to overturn the elections with or interfere with the elections with, or to undermine the Trump administration, or to undermine the policies that he campaigned on that the American people voted for. Manafort was brought up on unrelated tax and bank fraud charges. Michael Cohen had his own set of problems, but being a Russian agent was not one of them. Per the Mueller report, the Steele dossier had accused Michael Cohen, former Trump lawyer, of going to Prague to meet with Russian agents. Quote, Cohen had never traveled to Prague. And we knew that in 2017. we knew that based upon the what was said at the time by we knew the BuzzFeed memos, published memos against Trump and Russia were fabricated. They were immediately published. This was what was this? January of 2017. Trump wasn't even sworn into office, and at Daily Torch, we and Americans for Limited Government, we already knew that this was BS, that this was bogus. What Michael Cohen ever to Prague? He says, I have my passport. I've never been to the Czech Republic. So there you have it. I mean, this was, and then you need Mueller to, 2 years later to confirm, oh yeah, Cohen never went to Prague. And I guess the intelligence was bad. And so we very well could not have been there meeting with Russian intelligence officials. And we knew that as early as January of 2017, when BuzzFeed published the allegations of the Steele dossier. And just like a deed that will live in infamy. These reports allege Trump has deep ties to Russia, compiled by a person who is claimed to be former British intelligence official. Trump, the allegations are unverified, and the report contains errors. Miriam Elder, and this is a very controversial publication of an unverified dossier. But this would become the basis of congressional oversight against FISA. And again, that this turns out this was used by the FISA court, and they were eventually able to prove it via declassifications that occurred. So this BuzzFeed news report inadvertently, I mean, maybe they were trying to, I don't think they were trying to help Trump. They were reporting on a news item. The Clinton campaign and Steele himself was shopping this thing around. Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS, they were all working together, the Clinton campaign, the DNC, to get this published somewhere, anywhere, to show that Trump was a Russian agent. It really was true. We'll publish it, especially now that CNN has these allegations out there that Trump is under an active FBI investigation. He's about to be sworn in. So BuzzFeed says, let's publish the dossier. It was very controversial, but that would have been able to get to the bottom of all of the allegations. Michael Cohen going to Prague, they're in here. And so it makes it possible for, to debunk the dossier and to debunk the allegations virtually before Trump had even been sworn into office. And that probably helped him politically, because otherwise he was being encircled by the FBI. As for Page, he was never charged with anything. A footnote nonetheless attempted to justify the issuance of the FISA warrants against him, stating, per Mueller, quote, on 4 occasions, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court issued warrants based on a finding of probable cause to believe that Page was an agent of foreign power. And then he cites the law, and the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court's probable cause finding was based on a different and lower standard than the one governing the office's decision whether to bring charges against Page, which is whether admissible evidence would likely be sufficient to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Page acted as an agent of the Russian Federation during the period at issue. And then he cites some court precedent here, United States v. Cardoza, 2013, DC Circuit Court, explaining that probable cause requires only, quote, a fair probability, and, quote, not a certainty or proof beyond a reasonable doubt or proof by a preponderance of evidence. So it's a kind of a low threshold to go and spy on a presidential campaign, carry that investigation over into his administration after he's been elected, and to, get the national security advisor deposed by, subjecting him to questioning. We'll get to Michael Flynn in a moment here. Remarkably, it seems the Justice Department knew there was no conspiracy with Russia as early as 2017. It was revealed by Justice Department Inspector General Michael Horowitz. So there's a kind of an Inspector General report that comes out on the heels of the Mueller report. And it shows that there were doubts at the Justice Department about this investigation and about the evidence that they were being bamboozled with by the Clinton campaign, as it turns out. Certainly by the time Mueller was appointed, they had these doubts, but who kept the shameful inquiry going for another 2 years? Now, ultimately, the Mueller report basically exonerates Trump, says they can't find the conspiracy with Russia, nothing they can prove in court, which means it shouldn't be, subject to, a federal proceeding in this country. You have to have proof beyond a reasonable doubt in America. You have to abide by the Fourth Amendment too, and not do unreasonable searches. Is this not an unreasonable search if it's going to, kind of topple over the Trump administration, President Trump's ability to enact the policies that the American people elected him to do, things that he believed, in his heart? He was running on this. He wasn't a foreign agent. He was falsely accused. And then does he get to implement his policies? Or is his national security advisor going to be removed? Is Jeff Sessions going to, be kind of recused from overseeing the Justice Department? Trump didn't even have the Justice Department for the first few years to enact his policies. The FBI finally contacted former British spy Christopher Steele's sources, and after the surveillance had already been renewed once in January of 2017. And according to the Inspector General report, we have that here somewhere. We might as well show it to you. Let's see here. Where is the Inspector General report? There it is. Office of Inspector General, U.S. Justice Department, Oversight, Integrity, and Guidance. Review of 4 FISA applications and other aspects of the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation. This was by Michael Horowitz, issued in December of 2019. We're going to quote from there. According to the Inspector General report, one of the main sources that Steele used was contacted. Quote, the primary subsource made statements during his or her January 2017 FBI interview that were inconsistent with multiple sections of the Steele reports, including some that were relied upon in the FISA applications. Among other things regarding the allegations attributed to person one, the primary subsource's account of these communications, if true, was not consistent with and in fact contradicted allegations of a, quote, well-developed conspiracy. That's from the Steele dossier. Their case had collapsed, basically. That's what William Barr, later Attorney General, said, that they didn't have a case. This thing should not have been carried forward. But on and on it went. Why? As Congress considers FISA reauthorization, it must consider the only reasons we've learned about any of this is because of classified information that was revealed to the public. In almost every case, the illegal processes that were initiated by executive branch officials, including the Attorney General and the President. The exceptional case, the exception to that, was the BuzzFeed dossier. But that was protected by the First Amendment. Steele was shopping this thing around. By then, everyone in Washington, D.C. had a copy. Harry Reid had a copy. Jim Comey had a copy. John McCain had a copy. He was fishing this thing around too via his surrogates at the time. Steele and the Democrats were so anxious to shop the Russiagate story everywhere, they had distributed the dossier to major news outlets throughout the country. It was a gift to the American people insofar as it would have required a declassification process to get at it. So BuzzFeed actually did everyone a favor there. Otherwise, all of these disclosures were completed by the Trump administration, acquiescing to congressional requests for information. That's the declassification process, as well as Judicial Watch's Freedom of Information Act request, which was ultimately granted in 2018 there. So you get the FISA warrant for Carter Page and the Trump campaign, thanks to a Freedom of Information Act request as well. But it had to go through the review process, and President Trump and the Trump administration would have been able to release that. For example, the Justice Department Inspector General investigation by Michael Horowitz was only ever undertaken, quote, in response to requests from the Attorney General and members of Congress, according to a March 2018 statement by the Inspector General. So if you want to give Jeff Sessions credit for something, he got the Horowitz investigation going. The Mueller report itself was ordered by the Attorney General as well, included its own declassification process. So we actually get a lot of disclosures thanks to the Mueller report, a lot of declassification of this botched investigation that should have never happened. Is thanks to the Mueller investigation. We learn more about FISA than we've ever known now, thanks to this whole fiasco. Portions of the Mueller report, however, remain heavily redacted. And much of the same can be said for released transcripts of his phone calls between phone calls between former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak on December 23rd, 2016, December 29, 2016, and December 31, 2016, that showed Flynn engaging with Kislyak to stop a dangerous escalation in U.S.-Russian relations from occurring during the presidential transition in 2016 after the election, were only ever revealed, quote, in response to bipartisan requests regarding the LTG Michael Flynn retired transcripts, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, and were declassified by former President Donald Trump in 2020, according to the Director of National Intelligence's office. Flynn was similarly removed as National Security Advisor after the calls were, not so coincidentally, leaked to the Washington Post in January 2017. Let's see if we can pull that one up. Here's Washington Post. Why did Obama dawdle on Russia's hacking? This was David Ignatius. This column has been updated. Something rotten in Denmark, mutters Marcellus as ghosts and mad spirits haunt Elsinore Castle in the first act of Shakespeare's Hamlet. So he's trying to make this as salacious as possible, talking about Carter Page and Donald Trump. Or is Page in this one? No, this is the Michael Flynn story. Sorry. This is about Michael Flynn having phone calls with Kislyak. And he goes through this. But a large part of it is we don't know anything about how this thing came to light. According to a senior government official, this was leaked before Trump comes into office. Flynn phoned Russian Ambassador Kislyak several times the day Obama administration announced the expulsion of 35 Russian officials, as well as other measures in retaliation for the so-called DNC hacking. Mueller had indictments against Russian individuals, intelligence agents, that were, they said they were the ones who hacked the DNC and provided them to WikiLeaks. And what the investigation was trying to establish was whether there was a connection between, or a conspiracy rather, between the Trump campaign and Russia to do this to help Trump get elected. And then the Mueller report found that there wasn't. But these phone calls were leaked to the Washington Post. And now we have the transcripts, which I'll read from here. Yet more disclosures have been derived from the appointment of special counsel John Durham by former Attorney General William Barr. To the extent that we're learning anything new from the prosecution of Igor Danchenko, for example, that Steele was offered $1 million to corroborate his allegations that former President Donald Trump was a Russian agent. Turns out not to be true. But there's actually a Wall Street Journal here, the FBI's $1 million dossier from the editorial board here. And you learn that the FBI and the Justice Department, there was offers of money on the table to continue the Steele dossier and up to $1 million. Mr. Durham's witness was FBI supervisory analyst Brian Auten, who interviewed Mr. Steele in early October 2016 with other agents. Mr. Auten admitted that at the meeting, the FBI offered Mr. Steele, quote, up to $1 million to prove his explosive claims. But Mr. Auten says Steele never received the cash because Steele, quote, couldn't prove the allegations. Mr. Steele also initially refused to identify his sources. In a September court filing, Mr. Durham disclosed, this is John Durham, special counsel. He's actually still on the job. We're waiting for the Durham report. Be any day now, I'm sure. Kind of kidding there. I don't know if we're ever going to see the Durham report. Merrick Garland might not let it come out. It might be too damaging. Mr. Durham disclosed that the FBI was never, quote, able to confirm or corroborate most of the dossier's substantive allegations. So there you go. In order to get this information out there required a president first having been targeted by FISA and then being so infuriated that he sought relentlessly to expose the history of how the law was abused to the public. The crown jewel of that effort was on the day before he left office when President Trump then declassified a trove of documents related to, the botched investigation that falsely accused him of being a Russian agent. And there was a memorandum entitled Memorandum on Declassification of Certain Materials Related to the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane Investigation. And so he says he, put out a bunch of documents, declassified documents related to Russia and the Clinton probes. And then here's the memorandum on declassification of certain materials related to the FBI Crossfire Hurricane investigation. I hereby declassify the remaining materials in this binder. He determined that the materials in the binder should be declassified to the maximum extent possible. In response, as part of that process, the FBI noted its continuing objection to any further declassification of the materials in the binder, and also on the basis of a review that included intelligence community equities, identified the passages it believed to be most crucial to be kept from public disclosure. I've determined to accept these redactions for continued classification by the FBI in that January 17th submission. So this is on January 19. He's saying, okay, you want to do a redacted version? That's fine. Get the redacted version over here, but it never arrived. So not before the FBI complained about the need for redactions. He says he hereby declassified it. This was my final determination under the declassification review, and I have directed the Attorney General to implement the redactions proposed in the FBI's January 17th submission and return to the White House an appropriately redacted copy. But that redacted copy was never returned to the White House as ordered. In May, former Trump administration official Kash Patel said he witnessed the declassification himself in a phone interview with Breitbart.com. This is a remarkable story. Documents at Mar-a-Lago marked as classified were already declassified, Kash Patel says. This guy says he's an eyewitness. He's a top Trump advisor. He's at the White House. He knows what's going on with these documents that the FBI raided Mar-a-Lago for last summer. It was quite a shocking thing to do, but here's this declassification order. Seems to back up what Trump is saying about he was declassifying Crossfire Hurricane investigation documents, the last trove of them, for the American people, and they still haven't been turned over to the American people who they belong to now. They don't belong to the Justice Department. They've been declassified. It's time to turn them over, Attorney General Garland, but he hasn't done it. Quote, the White House counsel failed to generate the paperwork, this is Kash Patel, to change the classification markings, but that doesn't mean that the information wasn't declassified. I was there with President Trump when he said, quote, we are declassifying this information. And the Biden administration Justice Department, led by Attorney General Merrick Garland, never complied with the memorandum either. Senate Judiciary Committee ranking member Chuck Grassley and Senator Ron Johnson revealed in both February 15, 2022 letter to Garland and an October 2021 letter on the same, complaining about the lack of disclosure. These appear to be the same documents, or some of the documents, perhaps, that the FBI raided from Trump's residence in Palm Beach, Florida, Mar-a-Lago, on August 8, 2022. On Truth Social on August 12th, Trump noted it was all declassified, referring to the documents seized. We could take a look at that, go over to Truth Social, see what President Trump was saying back last year. There could be more context there. Thanks to the disclosures of political enemies of the state being investigated by a secret police, public opinion of the FBI and the Justice Department, especially among Republicans, is at an all-time low. How you liking the Justice Department now? I bet you don't even like them. I bet you like them even less after hearing all this stuff here. Here was Trump in August 12, 2022. Number one, it was all declassified. Number two, they didn't need to seize anything. They could have had it anytime they wanted without playing politics and breaking into Mar-a-Lago. It was in secured storage with an additional lock as per their request. So Trump says he was cooperating, and in any event, these materials have been declassified. The whole reason, by the way, for the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978 was adopted to prevent unconstitutional domestic spying. A select committee headed by Senator Frank Church, Democrat of Idaho back then, convened in 1975 to get to the bottom of revelations by Seymour Hersh's explosive report in the New York Times on December 22, 1974, that the CIA had been engaged in a mass domestic surveillance program against anti-war protesters, members of Congress, and other political figures. This was huge news back in the day. December 22, 1974, Seymour Hersh, huge CIA operation reported in U.S. against anti-war forces, other dissidents in Nixon years. And it's actually an archive version. I bet you can look this up. You can even buy reprints. Like they're selling this. This is a popular news report. They probably teach this in journalism school. We could read a little bit of it. The Central Intelligence Agency, directly violating its charter, conducted a massive illegal domestic intelligence operation during the Nixon administration against the anti-war movement and other dissident groups in the United States, according to well-placed government sources. An extensive investigation by the New York Times has established that intelligence files on at least 10,000 American citizens were maintained by a special unit of the CIA that was reporting directly to Richard Helms, then director of the Central Intelligence Agency and now ambassador to Iran. In addition, the sources said a check of the CIA's domestic files ordered last year by Mr. Helms' successor, James Schlesinger, produced evidence of dozens of other illegal activities by members of the CIA inside the United States, beginning in the 1950s, including break-ins, wiretappings, and surreptitious inspection of mail. And this goes on and on. So this becomes the basis of the Church Committee. There's actually an interview that Frank Church did with NBC's Meet the Press in 1975. I want to share that with you. So what we're going to do here is just pull it up over there. No, that's not the one. There it is. There's Frank Church. It's probably going to we're going to stop sharing the screen for a second because I need to share audio in order for you to be able to hear this. It's also a spinning wheel right now. So I might actually just have to see if I hit play. Okay, it will. All right, so we're going to present again. We're going to share the screen. We're going to share the audio. And here it is. Hopefully you can hear it. Sometimes this doesn't work too well. So I'm going to turn my volume all the way up as well. We're going to share the screen again. All right, there's that. And then we turn up the volume all the way to the top. And we turn up the YouTube volume all the way to the top. And then we're going to mute the microphone so we don't get an echo.
Do you think that the CIA and military decision and by the Federal Preparedness Agency, it's called now, to have contingency plans which threaten the liberty of American citizens?
Mr. Rowan, in due course, the committee will pass judgment on those questions. I'm not going to pre-guess the committee or prematurely attempt to pass judgment on this program. But let me tell you this. In the need to develop a capacity to know what potential enemies are doing, the United States government has perfected a technological capability that enables us to monitor the messages that go through the air. These messages are between ships at sea. They could be between units, military units in the field. We have a very extensive capability of intercepting messages wherever they may be in the airwaves. Now, that is necessary and important to the United States as we look abroad at enemies or potential enemies. We must know. At the same time, that capability at any time could be turned around on the American people. And no American would have any privacy left. Such is the capability to monitor everything, telephone conversations, telegrams, it doesn't matter. There would be no pod if this ever became a tyranny, if a dictator ever took charge in this country. The technological capacity that the intelligence community has given the government could enable it to impose total tyranny. And there would be no way to fight back, because the most careful effort to combine together in resistance to the government, no matter how privately it was done, is within the reach of the government to know. Such is the capability of this technology. Now, why is this investigation important? I'll tell you why. Because I don't want to see this country ever go across the bridge. I know the capacity that is there to make tyranny total in America. And we must see to it that this agency, all agencies that possess this technology, operate within the law and under proper supervision so that we never cross over that abyss. That's the abyss from which there is no return.
So that was Frank Church. And, you know, a great man. He got the FISA Act into law in the first place, and it was designed to stop this from ever occurring on U.S. soil again. And eventually, though, it became a rubber stamp. We actually have FISA court rubber stamps that we had minted. I don't know if you can really read it, though. FISA warrant approved. There it is. We had FISA warrant approved rubber stamps. You know, kind of as a gag to, you know, show what's going on with the FISA warrant. Frank Church, you know, he couldn't, if he were alive, he wouldn't be pleased with what came from this investigation. The committee that he had chaired beginning in 1975, it eventually led to the adoption of the law, which sought to reform how intelligence is gathered and the limited circumstances that can be used in the U.S. Sadly, FISA has become a rubber stamp and an instrument of not merely political surveillance, but of one-party rule, and even has been used to push the U.S. closer to nuclear war with Russia, which we are now on the apparent brink of. You know, President Trump keeps saying that. He was saying it in 2016, too. He didn't want us to have, you know, poor relations with these countries overseas that have thousands of nuclear weapons pointed at one another, pretty much adopting the position of every single president that had come before him. You know, Ronald Reagan famously said that a nuclear war cannot be won and must not be fought. So I think that's just a continuation of the same policy. Why was it suddenly so controversial that now you got to do surveillance on the Trump campaign for basically saying the same thing? I don't know. Hillary Clinton concocted the allegations. I suppose we could ask her and her campaign functionaries why the heck they did this and put this country through this, because, man, what a mess we're in now because of it. As for the surveillance in the U.S., it was clearly targeted at Trump and Republicans and is rotten to the core. Disclosure is what it fears the most because that is the only way to make it stop. You know, Seymour Hersh, he puts this into play. And I think that we need to get to the bottom of this. Disclosure is what Congress should demand of the declassified Russiagate papers, which it should absolutely subpoena what Trump had at Mar-a-Lago, this final binder of documents. They should definitely, you know, be bringing that forward to the American people. And subpoenaing those documents so that we can see them. They belong to the American people. They have a right to know. To know just how much the Justice Department and the FBI are interfering with our elections. Without these particular documents, it might be impossible to ever reform the system. Since taking office, though, Biden has gone even further with abusive prosecutions of Republicans, even raiding Trump's home, not to mention the censorship of the FBI's Foreign Intelligence, Foreign Influence Task Force, and the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They've been using it to censor Republicans and conservatives on social media. There's collusion to, you know, kind of suppress the Hunter Biden laptop by these government agencies. There was, you know, they come forward and it turns out it was the Biden campaign that was pushing these former intelligence officials to say that this was Russian disinformation. Well, that's what they said about the DNC emails, or that there was a Russian operation. Then they say the same thing about the Hunter Biden laptop. And this all happens in the context of running for the president against Donald Trump. Well, if the Hunter Biden laptop wasn't Russian disinformation, should we now ask questions about what was going on with the DNC? Maybe so. Congress should look into that as well. How much, we know the Steele dossier was concocted. What other parts of that were made up too? We wonder. This push for a tyrannical one-party system with little to no opposition. In a Twitter video on April 26th, former Fox News host Tucker Carlson has warned, quote, "Suddenly the United States looks very much like a one-party state." He's not wrong. He states that undeniably big topics, the ones that will define our future, get virtually no discussion at all: war, civil liberties. He says emergent science, demographic change, corporate power, natural resources. When's the last time you heard a legitimate debate about any of those issues? It's been a very long time. Debates like that are not permitted in American media. Both political parties and their donors have reached consensus on what benefits them, and they actively collude to shut down any conversation about it. He's absolutely right. Former Fox News host Tucker Carlson recently fired. And he, with the House hearings going on now, with FISA abuse taking place this week, one of the issues Carlson almost certainly would have been discussing this week was the surveillance state and the bipartisan consensus that to this day protects it. The hearings and what's exposed at them are important, but what Congress and the American people do with that information is even more important. And by demanding reforms, or else these abuses will continue, and the quote total tyranny that Senator Church warned about will become the reality we all must live with. In many ways, we are already there. And what the members of Congress may not realize yet is that it will be used against them too, because it already is. It's already interfering with our elections. It's already hindering our ability to speak out. And if Congress doesn't do something about it soon, it might become too late. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day. We're going to go to the chat here. I'm sure you guys are pretty fired up about what's going on in this country and what's going on with the surveillance. So I'd love to take your comments here. Here is Michael Lewaszewski. Oh, wait, we're going to go to the top here. Wow, look at this. All right, let's see. John Galapani. No one's been spying on Trump. Yeah, okay. That one's funny. I mean, he actually came in before the chat, before the video had actually started. I wonder if we changed his mind. We'll see if he followed up. R. David Hummel. When we wander away from plain spoken truths of views and news, of need to know variances of governance, pros and cons that affect the well-being of our citizenry and the sovereignty of our republic, and accept the potential threats that government knows best, our America will be on a wide path to soon fall from within. It is indisputable that Harris, Biden, Mayorkas, and many other in the administration should be impeached for their flagrant crimes and violation of their oath of office. Wow. Roland Hutchinson, treason. Thank you for your comment, Roland. Here we go. Wanda Ray, we need more Snowdens. We do need declassification. I think there's legal ways to do it that will be less risky for people who are going to undertake that. So I think it takes a president, President Trump or another Republican is probably going to have to come in here to truly declassify and get to the bottom of all this. Betsy Burns, I think Trump might change his mind now about limiting government. I don't know. I think this is something where you need to limit government. People want to say that Trump's not for limited government. I think that was another John Galabani. That's what Betsy's responding to here on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in from YouTube, by the way, and Facebook and Rumble and everywhere else. Let's see. LaDonna Finney, Snowden had to leave the country for exposing the truth. He took an extraordinary risk. And kind of chips fall where they may. He had to flee to Russia, of all places, but I guess that's where you go when that happens. Pell Rick, rules for thee, but not for me. That's pretty true. Yep. Gary Miller says, end the FISA court. Yeah, I think they should defund it or threaten to defund it. They could do that in the debt ceiling. They could hold up this reauthorization. They could do it in the National Defense Authorization. They could do it in the, any of these spending bills, continuing resolutions, anything that's a must-pass piece of legislation. I think they can pretty much try to rein this in. Congress needs to assert itself. I agree with Jim Jordan here. Robert White, but first, the corrupt Democrats need to go to prison. Everyone's holding out for we just need to prosecute these people and that will create a deterrent to do it. But you need a president, you need an attorney general that's willing to bring those prosecutions. And then you need proof beyond a reasonable doubt to, prove it in a court of law. It's probably going to be in Washington, D.C. Good luck getting a jury to prosecute Democrat officials. I mean, the Democrats are going to have a hard time prosecuting Trump, even in New York City, because it's so controversial. We could seek to do prosecutions I'm leaning towards oversight because that's where we've kind of, we need more oversight up on Capitol Hill, and we need better laws to prevent these things from happening, and more restrictions on this. Who's going to enforce it, though, is finally, it's always going to be the president and the attorney general. It's up to them to enforce our laws. We only get one president at a time. We have a unitary executive under Article 2 of the Constitution. And that's what the framers intended to, I think, kind of prevent the political prosecutions and the kind of, but they thought that the system they were founding would prevent political civil wars because it could cure, this was Madison Federalist number 10, cure the mischiefs of faction. I don't know that it worked. The Civil War in 1860, and then the abuses that we're seeing in the 20th century and now the 21st century show that factions are alive and well. Let's see here. Wanda Ray, the Biden administration cares nothing about the Constitution or the law. Thank you, Wanda. Michael Luzinski, January 6th, it was a protest. And yes, there's surveillance that comes out of that as well. The January 6th riot at the Capitol, and the Americans who were, prosecuted, I think that shouldn't have been, or they were prosecuted to much greater extent of the law than they needed to be. If they weren't being violent, if you weren't inciting violence that day, then, people were going in and taking selfies. Maybe there's a trespassing, violation there. They had different laws they could choose from. Some of the people they threw the book at. Let's see here. James Starkey. These are Marxists. I guess we're referring to the laws or the officials who were involved with this. Let's see. Michael Luzinski, Adam Schiff. Pemp's so-called impeachment attempts should be called exactly what they were: domestic terrorist attack. I just think it's political shenanigans to abuse the impeachment process, and kind of a fool's errand. But on the other hand, the framers kind of thought that would happen anyway, so they made it very difficult to remove a president from office. Although it takes a majority of the House to impeach, it takes 2/3 of the Senate to remove the president from office. It's never happened. No one's ever reached the threshold. They did it to Trump twice, and they couldn't even get him. They couldn't even get him so-called removed from office after he had already left office. They had a trial after for a former president. Really, they were trying to disqualify him, but he was acquitted in both impeachments. So it's kind of history now. Reggie Gibson, Joe Biden and his whole administration needs to be kicked out of the White House and Trump reinstated. Well, if you want Trump back, you're going to have to vote for him in 2024. There's no process to get a former president back into office. That's a fantasy. Anyone who said, yeah, we're going to get Trump back in while Biden's still in office, it's foolishness. It's not real, guys. Okay. Let's see here. Robert White, start putting people in prison. Again, you can try to get at these people. John Durham tried to prosecute some of the people who were responsible for the Steele dossier, and for lying to federal investigators. And those cases are going nowhere. You have to bring them into Washington, D.C. court. And it's going to be a lot of Democrats on those juries, and they don't want to hear that the Hillary Clinton campaign was engaged in all these political shenanigans. So where do you want to bring these prosecutions? Carson Stephen, I agree. Michael Luzinski, the people in charge that's supposed to be prosecuted are in collusion with them. Tyranny. Well, yeah, or corruption. So this is something where that it's coming to light is probably a miracle. That we know so much about it is probably a miracle. And it's up to the American people to, basically act upon this via their civil institutions, via voting. If you dislike what's going on with the Biden administration, if you want Trump back, for example, you can vote for him in the primary next year, and you probably can vote for him in the general election should he get the nomination again. Let's see. Andrew Hohensee. I believe everything Snowden says, but do not believe anything Biden says. Jamie K. Costello. I agree 100%. Time for all Americans to wake up. The Democrats are enemies. I have proven this over and over again. I don't think the partisan Democratic voters are the enemies. I think they're just people who vote for the other party, probably because their parents voted for that party or their spouses do. So the two predictors for political affiliation are usually your parents or your spouse. There's some people that cross over, they go against their spouse or they go against their parents. But I think people who are just voting, your neighbors are not your enemies. And I have to I'll just say that, my parents are Democrats. Let's see. Michael Lazewski, BS, Biden lifted the sanctions on Russia that created the attack. Stop lying. Americans witnessed it. Fact. Okay. Wanda Ray, he's the one that took the oath. If he can't do it, impeach him. No questions asked. You can impeach him, but you're not going to get a conviction in the Senate. So you're probably wasting your political capital. I don't think that impeaching Trump helped Democrats. American Democrats are allowing the CCP to infiltrate America. See, we have all these allegations that every one of their political opponents is a foreign agent. What a coincidence. And these are the factions. It's like, oh, Democrats are calling Republicans Russian agents. Republicans are calling Democrats Chinese agents. What a productive discussion we're having in this country right now. Don't you love it? Let's see. Manny Reyes, good luck. The crookedness goes extremely deep on both sides and our own military too. Timothy Bibster. Like I said, does anyone remember Jim Jones, his ruthless cronies to keep yourself and your children away from Biden and his entire administration? Let's see. Lazewski, Michael, these two impeachment hearings are labeled wrong. They were domestic terrorist attacks. Impeachments are initiated by Congress via acts. They vote. There were votes. He got impeached twice. You want me to say, oh, it's terrorism? It's like, no, it's not terrorism. It's just Congress wasting everyone's time, resources, and tax dollars. Don Miller Jr., I never thought our country could fall as fast as it has during the Biden administration. This all started before the Biden administration. This domestic surveillance program goes back decades and decades. Throughout the Cold War, this was a problem. And led to a lot of disclosures in newspapers and eventually the Church Committee by Frank Church and acts of Congress, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which ultimately ended up being abused as well to spy on the American people. As the technology has advanced, that seems to be the only limit to the surveillance and how it's used against the American people, and then to interfere with our elections. Is the limit itself is maybe how much data they can store. That's kind of a scary thought now that they have AI. Maria Williams, did nobody ever even bother to check his horrible past, Joe Biden? Michael Lazewski, Congress needs to stop calling them impeachments. All right, that'll stop them. William White, impeach the idiot. Wait, see, we got another impeachment there, but we can't call them impeachments. I don't know. Let's see here. I'm getting to the bottom of here. Jane Carter, John Miller Jr. My mother has passed, but I remember her complaining in the 70s about Joey, talking about Joe Biden. And then Pell Rick, and here we are. Yeah, here we are now. Elizabeth Blair, Pelosi, new President Trump found all her dirt and her husband and all their travels, insider trading, influence making, selling their souls, more importantly, selling us, America. What gave them the right to do any of these things that they have done? Yeah, it's not really the topic today, though. We're talking about FISA reauthorization. Section 702 is coming up, whether Congress should use that to try to achieve some reforms. Can you reform FISA? If not, should they just end it? And as Devin Nunes pointed out in the Americans for Limited Government interview last year, even if you allow Section 702 to expire, Title I of the FISA law that the spying on the Trump campaign occurred under would remain in place. And so just simply doing nothing won't work. We need to probably use the reauthorization. That's what Congress can work on. That's what Jim Jordan's working on. We'll see how it kind of turns out here. And with that, we're at the bottom here. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good night.